All right, to start off this video, the first term we'll talk about is the word simplify. Simply, simply means to combine all like terms that can be combined, to reduce the number of terms in an expression. Now remember, the term was kind of like a word in a language, so we're going to reduce the number of terms. So we're going to make this simpler, in other words. That's why it's called simplify. We're going to make it shorter, we're going to make it easier. And this is done after substitution. So after we have an equation, we put those numbers in there, we substitute for the variables. That's when we simplify. This is actually the very first step in solving an equation, is simplification. So let me give you an example of what I mean by simplification. All right, so let's say we have, let me move this camera just a little bit. Let's say we have this equation, d equals VIT plus 1/2 AT squared. So the first step we would take is we would substitute numbers in. So let's say our D was 40. Let's say VI is 0. Notice how I'm putting all the substituted numbers in parentheses. I tend to do that to keep things straight. I don't really know exactly why. To me, it looks cleaner. This 1/2 is part of the equation. Let's say A is 9.8 and we're going to leave this as it is. A lot of people will say, Mr. Falls, where'd you get those numbers? I just made them up, right? Let's just say our D is 40, VI is 0, and A is 9.8. Those are our givens. And let's say that this problem is asking us to find T. Now remember, what we're talking about here is simplification. So the first step in doing algebra here is I got to simplify all this stuff. So I got 40 over here, can't simplify that anymore. But let's look at how we can decrease all this mess. First of all, this one right here. Everybody check this out. A lot of people have trouble with this. People want to simplify this by just putting t down here. And I'm like, no, 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 no. What is 0 times t? And they're like, well, I don't know. What is 0 times anything? It's 0. 0 times t, even if you don't know what t is, doesn't matter. 0 times anything is 0, which means this little term right here will actually go away. That simplifies this, doesn't it? Now we just have this 1/2 and 9.8 right here. We're going to multiply right there. Multiply those two to simplify this, because I can make that term smaller and more compact by just doing 1/2 times 9.8. Remember, when they're next to each other, that means multiply. 1/2 times 9.8, that's the same as 9.8 divided by 2. We'll talk about that in a minute. That's 4.9. And then this t squared didn't change anything, so we're going to simply bring it down. Don't forget that. A lot of times as the equation goes on, people lose the squareds or things like that. Be really careful that you're very carefully copying the equation from one step to the next. All right. So that's what simplification means. This is our simplified expression. It's the same as the one above, but it looks a lot simpler. And now we can actually do some algebra to solve it. We can divide by the 4.9 to get rid of it there. 40 divided by 4.9 happens to be 8.16. And then I'm going to bring down this t squared, right? And then the last step here to get rid of this squared is going to be to take the square root, and that's going to leave me with 2.9, and I'll be done there. If this didn't make sense to you, that's okay. That's the algebra part of solving. I'm going to talk about that more in just a second. I really wanted to talk about this simplification process. Simplifying is a really important process before you can do algebra. So that's what simplify means. All right, next we're going to talk about the word distribute. This will be our last term. Distribute simply means to multiply each of the terms inside of a parenthesis. So we got to have parentheses for this one. Multiply each of those terms inside of parentheses as long as they're separated by plus or minus by the term outside the parentheses, right? This is also part of simplifying. So let's talk about what it looks like to distribute. So let's say we have this equation and we've gotten our givens and we're going to substitute those in. Let's say that J is 25. Let's say we're trying to solve for M, so I'm going to leave M the way it is. And let's say VF is 10. I'm going to put that in parentheses. Notice that the parentheses is part of the equation, so I leave that there and I substitute my numbers in parentheses. Again, that's what I do. You don't necessarily have to do that. And let's say our VI is 4. All right, now I'm doing this because in this case, you could distribute, but it might as well just simplify this just using arithmetic here because 10 minus 4 is 6. So you end up with 25 equals m times 6, which is 25 equals 6m, right? And then we would solve that. In this case, distribution is really not required, all right? But let's look at what if we were solving for something different, all right? So let's say we're starting with the same equation, but instead of these givens, let's say now we're solving for VF. So let's say our J is still 25. All right, again, not dealing with this. J is still 25. Let's say we know M at this point, and our M is 5. We're solving for VF, so I'm going to leave it the way it is. And let's say our VI is 2 at this point, okay? So we know J, we know M, we're solving for VF, and we want, and we know that VI is 2. In this case, the first thing I want to do to begin to simplify is distribute this 5 into both of those. In other words, I'm going to multiply each of these terms by the term outside, right? So I still have this 25 over here on the left. 5 times VF is 5VF. And then I'm going to 5 times 2, that's 10, not equals, minus. Leave the minus there, because that's what it was in the equation. If this was plus, this would be a plus, right? We leave the same operation. 5 times 2 is 10, right? So now we have a simplified equation, and now we're going to start doing algebra. Add the 10, add the 10. 25 plus 10 is 35. We have 5VF on the other side because adding the 10 got rid of that. And now we're going to divide by the 5. 35 divided by 5 is 7. Again, if you didn't understand a lot of this stuff right here, that's okay. That's the algebra that we're going to talk about in just a minute.